the new Imaginarium Theatre for version 5.3 has just came out for the second version, so let's go take a look at what we have. So as usual, the disclaimer, I'm going to assume that you know the rules of Imaginarium Theatre. I'm not going to go over explaining them again and again. And I'm going to also assume that you have enough characters built to be able to put them into the lineup of your theatre runs, and that they are built decent enough to be able to clear or at least help you clear every single act. Now, just another reminder for those who may not know, this is not the Spiral Abyss. The stars in Imaginarium Theatre are not necessary in order to get the Primo Gem rewards. What matters is that you actually get the clears on every single act. So don't try to stress yourself too much to be able to get the stars, just make sure you can get the clear and move about your day. And as usual, timestamps are provided in the video description below, so feel free to skip to whichever parts they may actually help you. And this theatre guide in particular will be much more detailed than the previous one, so you don't really have to watch the entire thing. And before we take a look into the details, here's an infographic I made a while ago, and I'll put this in every theatre video. So if you don't know what acts are what, this is an image, and yeah, let's go take a look at the theatre. So the elements for the current season are Pyro, Hydro, and Anemo, making the possible reactions between Vaporize, Pyro, or Hydro Swirl. The opening characters are Hu Tao, Gaming, Mona, Xingqiu, Venti, and Heizou. Of course, if you don't have any of these units, you can opt, or rather you have to use one of the trial characters, which they may not offer the best sort of build, but it's better than nothing. So for the 4 special guests, we do have Thoran, Sitlali, Yunjin, and Ororon, and I would say out of 4 of these, I think 3 of these units will be useful, but I'll explain why later on. So we'll start off with a few general tips to go off. Number 1 is to try to use your weaker or less built units in the earlier acts, because earlier acts tend to have enemies with lower levels, which means they are much weaker than the later acts. This usually ends up with the challenge itself not being that difficult, and this will allow you to actually save your stronger and more well-built characters for later on. Number 2 is that if you don't have enough characters or you have a friend with a very good build, try to use the supporting cast option where you can invite 1 cast per run from one of your in-game friends if you don't have enough units, or if you want to have an easier time for your clear and your friend has a very good build on a character. And also keep in mind you can only use 1 supporting cast per friend per run, so be sure to choose wisely and make sure that whenever you do this run has to be the one that clears the most. Tip number 3 is specifically for Act 9 in bounties. So for Act 9, the bounty challenge, you don't actually have to kill all of the other units. If you want to save as much time as possible and have the best odds at clearing it within the star, ignore any other units, focus on the bounty, and this is usually indicated by the exclamation mark at the side of the enemy portrait in the act description. Or basically just go for the one that looks a bit more different than the other, and you should be able to get everything done just fine. Now for the tips I can give for every single act, I'm gonna go over roughly every single enemy that I have tried based on multiple runs that I just did today. So some will be useful, some will be nothing much. So let's start off with Act 1. So Act 1, my recommended one has got to be the Ruin Grader and the Ruin Drake combo, because you only have to kill 1 of each, and they don't have any particularly high resistance except for against physical, which is never really gonna happen. So it's a very easy clear, and this is also a good place for you to do your throwaway weak units so that you can actually save your strong units for later. We do have other options like the Cryo and Pyro Slimes. Now this one's a little bit tricky due to the Cryo Slimes having a shield, so you don't actually need to bring Pyro in this half. If you have one of the Pyro buffs, I think it's Flame Wind Basic Galefire, where if you trigger, I think, Anemo Swirl or Pyro Swirl, you're able to trigger like an AoE Firestorm which does Pyro damage. Or what you can also do is you can actually use the Anemo units to swirl Pyro off the Pyro Slimes, and that will allow you to actually break the Cryo Slime Cryo shield. If you want the Pyro Slime to spawn, just kill the smaller Cryo Slimes and it will make the next group of Pyro Slimes spawn, and they usually spawn alternating between Cryo and Pyro. And of course they spawn clockwise. Now, we do have the Specters. There's nothing in particular here. I think the elements are Electro, Geo, Hydro, and Dendro, I believe. Maybe I'm not correct on the Hydro part. But the Specters themselves spawn in waves of 3. Once again, there is nothing special about it. Though do keep in mind, the Electro Spectre will try to expand and explode. And Specters are exceptionally great at stalling for time because they take a few seconds to actually explode and die. So I don't really recommend this one unless you have like nothing to do for whatever reason. And we do have one more, which is the Rock and Nightwind Elite Assault Group, which gives you 110 Fantasia Flowers instead of the usual 90. If you really want more Fantasia Flowers, I do recommend getting this one because getting 20 more extra will be useful down the long run. So for Act 2, the one that I would recommend is, honestly, there's nothing really too difficult in Act 2, so I'm going to go over them one by one. So we do have the two Breacher Primus, which are the Dendro variant. If you do want to group them, what you want to do is you start the chamber and then run all the way to either to the left or to the right corner, which is roughly west 9 o'clock or east 3 o'clock. Give it maybe 3 to 4 seconds, and then the other side where they will start slowly grouping and they'll start approaching you. And then once they get close, you can immediately run back towards them and kill them both at the same time. Of course, granted that you can do this if your team DPS is not going to be enough, but they're not all that tanky, although you have to worry about actually dying, but they're not Geo, so it should be fine. The rest is straightforward. Hydro is the best at breaking its Dendro shield. Pyro is okay with triggering burning, but you'll probably kill them by the time you even break the shield in the first place. Now we also do have the Fluid Avatars of Lava, which if you want to bring your Hydro unit, it basically gives you free vaporized reactions without bringing any sort of Pyro character. So if you want to do that, it's very nice. You only have to kill 2 of them, so once again, it's very easy. You also have the regular Natlan warriors. Nothing for me to say about them. They're just regular human enemies. Just kill them, I guess. And then if you're lucky, you might be able to get the Elite Assault variant, which gives you 110 Fantasia flowers instead of the usual 90. So this one I think is the same as I mentioned just now. They spawn with 2 groups of 3, one in front of you and one behind you. Just go to one group and the other one will come towards you, then rinse and repeat for 2 waves, kill 12 enemies, and you should be good to go. Now Act 3 for the boss, we do have the Cryo and Anemo Fatui Operative Legends. This one is not as difficult as you think it is, and they're only level 90, so here's the strategy. Any crowd control characters or any grouping units like the Anemo units like Venti is particularly good, Kazuha, Lanyan with burst to some extent, Sucrose with the skill and the burst to stagger them a little bit is very helpful at making sure that they stay grouped up together and they don't hit you as often. So if you don't have any of the grouper units, no worries. When you start, you want to go for the Anemo Operative, which is on the right side of the chamber. When you go for the Anemo Operative, the Cryo one is a melee attacker, so she will naturally come towards you. Healing is not necessary here, even if they give you the Bond of Life mechanic, because if you have enough blessings and your characters are decently built, you should be able to kill them pretty fast. And otherwise, the rest is straightforward. So for Act 4, we have a few options for the Monolith defense, so I'll go over them one by one. So we do have the Treasure Hoarder options paired with the Pyro Fatui. This one's a little bit difficult if you don't bring any sort of Anemo grouper or a CC unit. So if you can bring any of these Anemo units, whether it be Kazuha, Venti, Faruzan, Lanyan, any sort of grouping is very highly appreciated. Generally, focus on the range units whenever they spawn, then you can always tackle the melee units, and there's nothing you can do about their aggro. Most of them will try to target the Monolith, except for the Pyro Fatui. If you do enough damage, he will go towards you, so you don't necessarily have to kill him. Now, I'll talk about the blessings more in depth later, but Vaporize, Tidal Rush Blessing, the one where you trigger Vaporize and it spawns a tidal wave that does hydro damage, is exceptionally good for doing AoE damage. If you don't have a bit of damage and you're running a Vaporize team, I do recommend getting this blessing. Now for the second option, we do have the Fatui gang, which has a lineup of the Pyro Agent, the Cryo Assassin Mage, the Pyro Slinger, and the Cryo Gunner. Now this one is actually kind of one of the easier ones because they only spawn 2 at a time. So I think they start off with like 2 Pyro Agents or something. So as usual, just focus on one enemy one by one, and when you kill one, the other will spawn. The wave will start with I think 2 units on like adjacent sides, I believe. Now the thing about this one is it's actually quite easy. If you're not able to kill them, a strategy that you can employ is to actually do enough damage to grab their aggro and try to pull them away from the Monolith, and you could basically do kind of like a pacifist run where you don't really have to kill them and just wait for the timer to run out. This is something that I did with the Pyro Slinger because I forgot to bring a Hydro unit to break its shield, but if you're able to do that, then the rest is pretty much straightforward. If you can kill them, of course that will be great, but that's entirely dependent on your account. We do have another option, which is I think the easiest one, which is the Ruin Guard equivalent, the Secret Source Automaton Hunter Seeker, aka the Natlan robot. They only spawn one of these guys at a time, so you can also employ the Pacifist strat by dragging aggro and not really paying too much attention to it, so that will be pretty nice. You can kill it one by one, or you can just AFK after grabbing its aggro. Just do whatever you like, and the rest is pretty much straightforward. There's also the other option with the Ereremite gangs, similar strategy to the Fatui group, target the range units over melee units, and crowd control units are highly appreciated. And then lastly, I think also one of the easier ones would be the Fungi group. So bringing grouping units or Taunt in general is very useful for the entire chamber. I'll name the examples after this, but they generally spawn in waves, they spawn clockwise. Generally, if you want to kill them, you can either do 2 approaches. One is to kill the small one so that you remove the time much faster, so that you can actually get the 35% HP for the monolith to get the star. Or you can target the big fungi and the cryo slime to kill the time even faster, because the regular fungi and slimes don't really do all that much. They just kind of sit there and basically do nothing. And a general tip for the monolith defense is that bringing any taunt units is especially useful aside from the grouper units. Auroron and Lynette and Amber I have found to be quite effective in this case. If you're able to run one of them, that's great. If you're able to run them both together in a team, try to position your taunt away from the monolith and you should have an easy time. So for Act 5, we have a few options. Nobushis are one of the easiest one. It spawns in groups of 3. I think you have to kill like either 6 or 12 of them. Crowd control units are good here, but they're not necessary if your team has enough DPS. Otherwise, there's no special mechanic. They are melee units. Just kill them and then you can move on to the next act. The same could be said for Saurians. They also spawn in groups of 3. If you kill them, they spawn one by one, which is also another easy option. And Natlan warriors is also kind of nice. If you do get lucky though, you're able to get the high pressure elite assault with the fungi, which gives you 110 Fantasia flowers. I also recommend doing this one because, you know, getting more flowers is pretty nice for you to get more buffs and characters. Of course, crowd control units are pretty good here, or if you have any DPS units that have good AoE damage like Hayato or Arlecchino is also pretty nice. There's of course the Tenebrous Mimesis, but it's actually not that bad. If you have Koran or Auroron, Electrocharge is particularly good. Natlan characters can also break it decently well with like Citlali and Mawika. And if you're able to use Venti and Lynette with an absorption with the elemental burst, it is also pretty good at breaking the Void Shield. Luckily, the Void Shield is not as tanky as the current Abyss variant, so that part is going to make things a bit more easy. Now Act 6, we do have the Gold Flame Kukusaur Tyrant. It will start with the High Pyro mode. Just wait for it to do these 2 attacks and then it will spawn 2 feathers, where one will spawn on you and the other one will spawn to the left of where you were looking at the time it does the ability. Preferably bring Hydro here. You can bring Electro with the likes of Auroron and Koran, or maybe you stack up some Anemo units, but Hydro is generally going to be the fastest here. Whenever you already break the 2 feathers, you can basically stand at wherever you break the latest feather and try to line up your ability so that you can actually break the shield faster than intended. And then the rest is pretty straightforward, rinse and repeat. If you're fighting the guy, be sure to stay in front of it and do not stay behind it. Otherwise, if you are behind it, he will do a spin into a drilling move forward, which may actually work against you if you're running a circle impact team. Now Act 7, we have a few options. The Cryo Heralds are straightforward. Just bring a few Pyro units that are able to break the shield and you should be good to go. There's also the Pyro Lecter option, which could be a bit tricky, but you can actually do this grouping technique that is being shown on the footage right now. Basically, just start the chamber and run all the way back, and as they slowly come towards you, you want to go slowly towards the left so that the Lecter on the right will kind of get closer to the left one, and then afterwards you can go rush towards the Lecter and make sure that you face one Lecter and the other one is right behind him, so that whenever you use certain abilities that can stagger them or break their poise, like Yelan Burst or Bennett Burst, I think Furina can kind of break it to a certain point, but generally I think it's Yelan, Bennett, Xingqiu, and I believe Kaya. So you can actually use this information to your advantage to try to push them together. And if their HP is like really low or almost really low, like 5 or 10% like that, make sure that they're both in the right position, so that because whenever they do enter phase 2, right, they'll actually get knocked back. So when you want to do this, you want to make sure that they get knocked back into each other. So the first Lecter goes down first, you want to make it fall backwards towards his friend, and then if the other one's almost falling, you go to the other side and do the same, so that they'll be basically right next to each other, dropping that fireball mechanic so that you can break it easily and instantly break their shield as fast as possible. The Fontaine robots, I think, are also pretty easy. They're nothing special, you just kill them. There's a whole mechanic with Uja, Numa, but we don't talk about that. We also have the Wayop manifestation, which can be a bit tricky for certain teams. I don't recommend it, but it's also not too difficult, and if you want a challenge, you can try this out. So they spawn both Cryo and Pyro Wayops, and they start with the super move that will suck all your energy. So my general advice is to use all your important bursts early and try to bring any DPS that is not reliant on their burst in order to do damage. Once you're able to break the white shield with enough damage, you should be able to get all your energy back. Rinse and repeat with the Pyro Wayop, which spawns in second, and the rest is pretty straightforward. We also do have the Secret Source Automaton on board with the Husk Knights, which is actually not as bad as I thought. So the first wave will start with 3 Husk Knights. What you want to do is go to the Cryo Archer to the left, and then the rest are melee units. They will naturally come towards you. after you tackle these 3, the Hunter Seeker will spawn afterwards, which once again there's a whole mechanic with Natlan Blessing and Night's Soul Blessing, but you don't have to do it, just kill him, it's pretty straightforward, then you should be able to clear it. And then there's also, if you're lucky, you can get a high pressure battle with the Natlan Elite Warriors. The only recommendation I can say is that the first wave will spawn a melee dude and a ranged lady. Go for the ranged lady on the right, and then afterwards they'll spawn in 2 waves of 2 different elites. The rest is pretty straightforward, just kill them and we'll go to Act 8. So for Act 8, we do have the Tenebrous Papilla again, specifically Type 2, which is the Magu Kenki, the Primo V-Shap, the Hydro and Electro Hypostasis. Now, initially, I was a bit afraid of what we could do against its shield because you know his shield is pretty strong, but thank goodness this is not the Spiral Abyss, so his Void Shield is not as strong as the Abyss cousin. So Natlan characters are obviously pretty good at breaking the shield. I think it takes 53 gauge units in order to break it as far as I know. If you want to run Electro Charge teams, you can definitely do that with Auroron and Koran. Koran obviously with her combo normal attacks into skill is extremely good at breaking it on top of her elemental burst. For non-Natlan options, Venti's elemental burst when it absorbs an element combined with Lynette's burst, also with another absorption, is extremely good at breaking the shield. So if you don't have Koran or Auroron or any sort of Natlan units that isn't Kachina or Molani to help you break the shield, I highly recommend you to save your last use of Venti right here. So for Act 9 is the bounty. Most of them are quite easy to be honest, but maybe it's cute because of my account. So the Eroding Avatars of Lava is also one of the more easier ones. It's easy to kill because you only have to kill 2 of them. There's a whole Pyro Overheat mechanic where you build up enough Pyro and it will lead to an insta-kill, but this will rarely happen because they will be dead by then unless your team does like 0 damage for whatever reason. You also have the Cryo Lawachurls. You also need to take care of 2 of them. They spawn a bunch of Hilichurls, but try to focus the Cryo Lawachurl, and while they do recommend Pyro, it's not necessary at all. The Abyss Mages I think is one of the annoying ones because they spawn Abyss Mages in groups of 2. I think you have to kill 8 of them, and you can try to do a bit of grouping by going a bit far away, but I don't recommend it. Just bring Pyro units, just Pyro or Cryo units or Hydro units. I think there is like a Cryo and Pyro variant of the challenge. You just bring the right elements, kill them fast, and you can get it done. But it's a little bit annoying for them, so I would recommend the previous 2 if you do want to have an easy time to actually clear this bounty chamber. And the last one, we do have the Tenebrous Mimesis. You have to deal with 2 of them, but it's not as bad as you think because Electro Charge, as always, will use. Bringing Sitlali to break the shield and trigger freeze is actually a pretty nice way to keep him and preventing him from moving. Swirl here is actually also pretty good because the Mimesis actually spawns with a group of Hilichurls. So from what I calculated, if let's say Lanyan, 1 hit from the initial skill and then potentially 2 hits from the nearby swirl because an enemy can only take a maximum of 2 swirls at once. So by doing this, you're already doing 3 total hits on the Void Shield alone. So if you have some sort of like Sucrose or any sort of on-field Anemo unit, Sucrose or Lanyan I think will be pretty good at breaking the shield. But once again, I don't recommend this. Just go for the Eroding Avatars of Lava or the Lawachurl and just go move on to the final act. So for the final act, we have it a bit easy with the Perpetual Mechanical Array. It has a pretty straightforward mechanic. There's really nothing much to say about it. Just do enough damage and wait for it to go to phase 2 at about 30% health remaining. Now phase 2, there's a few things you can really do for the weak points. First of all, Jellyfish is definitely going to be the worst one, but if you have enough time, you can probably wait for it because it takes like 3 years to spawn. If you do get the Jellyfish by some mishaps, what you want to do is just maybe go a bit further to where the Jellyfish will spawn and wait for it to kind of just come to you. But if you don't mind waiting for a little bit, I guess. But otherwise, if you have enough DPS, you don't really need to do that. All of the grouping recommendations I'm making is mostly to make life a bit easy and for assisting any sort of circle impact team. Now the Dorito or the triangle is definitely the best. When it starts to spawn, you want to run all the way towards it and face it. Make sure that you face it towards where the Perpetual Mechanical Array's core is. Don't attack, by the way. What this will do is that it will actually dash back because you're too close to it, and it will end up dashing towards where the core is, and then you can immediately run to it, kill the Dorito, and then go take care of the core. So the Snake and the Defender is a bit tricky, and this one is completely RNG, but I can give a bit of a tip. The Snake has a RNG chance of basically doing the digging move. What I did find from my experience fighting the Perpetual Mechanical Array before is that what you want to do is you want to stand roughly in between the Snake and the core itself. Now keep in mind that this is completely RNG, but this is probably the most consistent thing by far that I did that was able to kind of just make it to trigger the digging move. Once it does actually do the digging animation, run to the core, wait for it to spawn next to you, and once it becomes hittable, hit it to prevent the move from completing, then kill the core and you're good to go. For the defender, it also has a similar move, but instead it does have a chance at doing the high leap move. Going far is not going to work too well because it's going to do the laser shot move. So similar strategy, try to be not too near it but not too far from it. Do the same strategy as the snake and you might have a chance of the defender jumping, and whenever it does jump, go to the core once again and it will group towards you. But otherwise, Perpetual Mechanical Array is pretty easy. By the time you get to this point, you're probably going to have like 3 billion blessing buffs that allows you to do like 1 million damage with a lot of units. So, you know, it's up to you if you want to do the grouping techniques, but regardless, I think that's all I can really give for the active. So, quick ranking tier list for all the units available for the current second half of the 5.3 theater. I'm going to start off with all the 5 stars and let you know what I think about them briefly. Try to make this section really quick. Mabuika is obviously really good because she's basically made for this one in some degree. Her off-field power application, the damage bonus she provides from one of her passives, and of course her damage is pretty solid. So being able to trigger Vape is also a pretty big winner to enable the buffs. So yeah, overall she's pretty freaking good. And of course we do have the Mimesis and the Papilla, which she is a Natlan unit. She's able to basically break the shield on her own. So that's already quite a big W. I think Chaska, I'm a bit unsure about this because I didn't actually run Chaska on the current one, but I think with enough ones, she's probably pretty decent. So I'll put it on the really good section. I'll probably do a bit of testing to see if I can verify this statement later on. Molani, I think, is good. I don't know if I want to count her as really good. I think her damage is obviously going to be like amazing, but she's definitely not going to be able to break the shields. But if you want her to do a good amount of damage, I think Molani is quite a good go-to for any non-multi-wave content. Now, Sejuin and I think Lini are the 2 units that I don't exactly know because I haven't really run a viewer theater, or I don't have any of these 2 units on my own personal account, so I cannot really say anything about them. Alakino is extremely good. AoE on the normal attack, and her just being a pyro unit already takes a big W from the vaporized blessings alone. Shenyun I think is actually okay. If you're able to pair her up together with Hu Tao, which is one of the opening casts, you're able to do the Vape Punch team, which has quite a good amount of AoE. And outside of that, if your Shenyun is running Viridescent Venera on top of, let's say, running her as a healer with Furina, she does offer quite a little bit of value over there. And you can also use her to drive one of the Pyro or Hydro Swirl reactions. Furina is obviously pretty good, I don't really have to say much. She's basically the character or the go-to character I use to go against the Kukuso because it actually makes it much easier to break the Hydro Shield because the summons actually does go after him even if it's flying super high. Nobushis, really good, consolidates a lot of things, self-sustained AoE, solid damage, I don't have anything to say about that, really good. Deya is actually decent but not as a DPS but rather as a support because her skill providing off-field pyro application can be used to enable the vaporized blessing on top of her, you know, providing interrupt resist, which can be useful for someone like Nobushis, and a bit of damage reduction here and there. Wanderer I would consider to be okay. If you don't have C6 Faruzan or your luck or your RNG, it doesn't permit you to get Faruzan together with Wanderer, his damage kind of falls off quite a little bit. He's not completely useless, but he's also not the best option that you have. You can run him as a driver, but to be honest, between Xiao and Wanderer, I would rather take Wanderer. I would even rather use Heizou over Wanderer in the current theater. Nilo is purely a driver. You can't use the Bloom passive. The only use she has is just helping applying Hydro, which can be useful in enabling the Vaporized buff, which is pretty freaking busted. Yalan's pretty good. Like, probably put it on the good section because I do have a C2 Yelan, but I think having a second Xingqiu is especially helpful to trigger Vape, especially for characters like Alakino and Hu Tao who really wants to do that, or you want to run Yoimiya too. Ayato, I would say, is pretty solid. Elemental skill has good AoE, the burst has a pretty nice range and off-field Hydro application. Granted, you have enough energy to actually get it every rotation and you don't mind using it, but his damage is definitely not going to be something you can expect out of it, but damage here is not really the biggest concern. Kokomi, I think, is also pretty good. The healing plus the off-field Hydro application helps in triggering the blessings, and then the healing does allow you to use basic kin. I think it's the Aqua Breeze buff at level 2, which does allow you to build like a Hydro Ball Ocean Hue kind of thing, so that's kind of nice. Yoimiya, I would say, is probably okay. I don't think Yoimiya is the best because she's very single target heavy, but if you're able to have a good Yoimiya, I think you can argue putting it on the good section, but I think it's between here and here depending on what characters you put on the team. I think she's going to be pretty solid. but definitely above Wanderer in that sense. Kazuha, grouping, Anemo, I don't have to say much. Damage bonus, VV, yep, you get the point. Hu Tao is good if you're able to run it together with, well, Xingqiu and Yelan, or have enough Hydro application in the team to trigger Vape. But if you're running Mono Pyro Hu Tao, don't expect her damage to really be all that high. Xiao, I would say, is actually kind of okay. I would probably put him in the good tier because he does have some good AoE consolidation, and you can take advantage of the Jetstream Plunge technique with his, thing, and then the fact that if you go against bosses, you can actually get 2 plunge attacks or plunge hits rather than the high plunge one, which does add his damage quite a little bit. Tartaglia, I think, is also good AoE, decent damage if you pair it up together with like pyro applicators like Sheng Ling that's able to, like Child International, just pretty good, so I don't have to say much about that. Klee is also good. Venti is really, really good against the multi-wave content, notably against the Cryo Operative, the Monolith defense, and my favorite one so far is probably against the Tenebrous Papilla whenever the burst does absorb. Fun fact, did you know that Venti has a passive where the elemental burst, whenever it absorbs any of the 4 main elements, it can actually restore 15 flat energy to any of the absorb elements in your team? Yeah, that's a pretty cool thing to have, especially if you do have energy problems. Mona, I would say, is good off-field Hydro application. The skill acts as a taunt, the damage bonus is pretty nice, and you can also use her together with Nouvellette for the Hydro resonance. Diluc, I would say, is also good. Burst has very solid AoE. His damage is okay. It definitely can be better depending on your level of investment, but the burst is probably the biggest reason why he's in this place. Jean, I would say, is okay. Outside of healing and applying Anemo like once, she doesn't really have much roles, or rather uses outside of pairing her together with Purina or running Sunfire with Bennett Burst, but other than that, yeah. Cloran is also pretty amazing. I would say I would put her in the good section, but because of the Tenebrous Mimesis on top of the Tenebrous Papilla, she is extremely good at breaking the shield, so there's nothing I can say about that. Sitlali, obviously really good. You can run Permafreeze, you can run Melt. She's also from Natlan, so Night Soul is very useful at breaking the Tenebrous family, and the same thing I could say for Auroron. You can run Electro Charge with Auroron together with Cloran, or just Auroron alone. The burst providing some taunt value is pretty good against the Monolith. If you're able to stack up multiple taunt units in the team, it will probably help you keep the Monolith HP above 35%. Yunjin, I would say, is okay because all she really does is buff Arlecchino, Yoimiya, and I think Ayato, but honestly, you look at all the other characters here, there's much better options. Lanyan is good, a bit of, you can run her as an on-field Anemo driver to trigger the buffs. Shield is pretty helpful, the burst is a bit of grouping every 2 seconds, so that's pretty nice. Garming at 3C6 is nice if you have a decent build like mine, but if you get C6 Garming, it's extremely good because the plunge AoE will help quite a lot against AoE content. Chevrolet is actually less of really good or good, but if you do have a C6, the Pyro bonus is quite nice for you to have. Otherwise, you'll probably use her as just a Sheng Ling battery or an attack buffer with one of her passives. Lynette, I would actually say, is one of the better ones. While she doesn't provide a lot of damage, her burst's ability to basically absorb element and help you with weak Hydro application is really useful for someone like Hu Tao or Yoimiya that does need a bit of Hydro application to trigger. On top of that, her burst does act as a taunt unit, so it does help quite a bit in distracting enemies in the Monolith defense. Aruzan, I would say, is okay at before C6, but once you get C6 is absolutely amazing. Her burst helping you do a bit of grouping with the elemental skill is pretty nice. If you run a quick swap team, you can actually use the skill into 2 charge attacks if you have C1 to do a bit of grouping and trigger the buffs, which is actually pretty good. Candice at C6 is good. The AoE Hydro application is kind of nice. Honestly, even if you don't have her C6, she's still kind of okay because you can use her ability to apply Hydro to actually trigger the Vaporize buff, which I'll explain in the later section. Heizou is also pretty good. Burst has a bit of grouping, the damage is okay, but he's a very potent driver, on top of being a character that is able to dish quite a good amount of damage comparable to someone like Xiao in this context. Homa is, I would say, good, mostly because of the Vaporize buff. Even if the shield is not useful to you or you don't have C6, at the very least, his ability to trigger Pyro off-field allows you to trigger the Vaporize buff, which already makes him quite valuable. Sayu has the same reason, provide a bit of healing, can pair together with Fuina, use the basic kin buff, and of course, be an Anemo driver for the buffs. Yanfei is okay. I think she's not that great of a Pyro DPS in the first place, but at the very least, she is Pyro, so you can trigger the Vaporize buffs. Xinyan is also more of the okay thing. Actually, no, let me put Okay, Yanfei, I'll just play with it. Xinyan, I think, is mostly for a driver role. You just apply Pyro from the skill and burst, otherwise she just basically doesn't really exist. Now, Sucrose, obviously all the other 1.0 units are all going to be amazing. Sucrose with Vivi, Bennett, Shangling, Xingqiu, the national variant is obviously great. Barbara is going to be a driver. You can use her for driving the Vaporize buff or the Aqua Breeze buff, which is a Hydro Swirl, and that allows her to have a bit more value. Amber with Taunt is actually pretty decent. If you do have at least, I think, C2 or was it C4 Amber, you can get a second charge of Baron Bunny, and it allows you to kind of really play around putting your taunts in different locations to really keep your monolith alive. And of course, being able to apply Pyro is useful for VV Vape setups and, well, triggering the Vaporize buff once again. Now, I made an infographic for every single buff that we have for the current one. Notably, Vaporize is going to be obviously Vaporize, and then we do have Aqua Breeze, which is Hydro Swirl, and of course, Hydro Swirl, aka Flame Wind. So I'll quickly explain what Brilliant Blessings are and how all of these really work in a very simple terms, just to really not waste too much time. So every single of these buffs have the very first level. They have 4 different levels of upgrades, which are branching paths, and some of them are good, some of them are okay, but I'm gonna recommend you a few of the ones that I use often to make clears much easier. Of course, I think the best one is definitely Vaporize because of what it does. I'm going to explain later. Second best is Flame Wind with a Pyro with a specific thing that I'll also explain later. And the worst by far is probably Aqua Breeze because the buffs don't really do that much and we don't have a lot of Hydro characters compared to Pyro characters. Now, Vaporize, level 1 Origin, you trigger Vape, you reduce their red shred to Pyro and Hydro resistance by 25%. Level 3 is Evolution, it enhances the initial level 1 buff from 25 to 30%, I believe. So level 2, we have 2 different paths. One is the Hydro path and the other one is a Pyro path. The Hydro path is the better one. If you watch in the previous footage, every time you trigger Vaporize, it will unleash a Tidal Shock, or rather like a wave of Tidal Surge towards the enemies, which does AoE Hydro damage. I recommend this one over Fledging Flame because the problem with Fledging Flame is that while it is nice that it tracks the enemy whenever you're able to trigger the buff, the range itself is very small. The damage is definitely quite negligible early on until you get the level 4, which I believe is Blazing Paramountcy. But even then, the Blazing Paramountcy basically adds like 2 more chain explosions and the damage does get increased to a certain extent, but it's not really that good. The AoE is not massive. And let me point this one thing in mind to convince you to get the Titanic Tide and Rising Tide over this, is that we have probably double or at least way more Pyro characters than we do have Hydro characters. So eventually you will reach a point where you're gonna have more spare Pyro characters than Hydro characters. This one is especially something that you want to keep in note because if you do want to benefit from the Vaporize buff, that also means that you need to have at least some sort of off-field Hydro applicator or by default some sort of Hydro unit in your team. So at the very least, if you were to take the Tide path instead, you are able to consistently trigger Vaporize even if you don't really have like a proper like off-field unit. It kind of acts like as another Hydro unit. And of course, the AoE is just very much appreciated. And the damage is way better than whatever Blazing Paramountcy and Fledging Flame is able to offer. And then level 4, we have 3 different options. So the non-elemental option is the Origin Refine, which increases the Vaporize damage your characters do by 50%. This is additive and not multiplicative. And the last 2 upgrades for the both paths is Titanic Tide for Hydro, Blazing Paramountcy for Pyro. Now, once again, I'm going to recommend Titanic Tide over Blazing Paramountcy because basically it upgrades that previous tidal wave that you have, makes the AoE probably like double or 50% bigger with bigger AoE and way bigger damage. From my experience, I think pure Hydro is able to deal 30 something K or 30 to 40k, maybe 50k. If it's able to Vape, it can probably reach like, I don't know, like 60, 70k just by triggering Vaporize. So this is especially helpful if you want to have some damage on your team, but you're running a bunch of characters that don't have very good investment or very good artifacts at all. I have done some viewer theaters on the day before the recording, and I can tell you that even running characters that basically have 0 damage in the team, the buffs alone were able to carry them to be able to kill someone like the Gold Flame Kukusaur. Blazing Paramountcy is like this. So instead of 1 explosion, it basically triggers like 2 other extra explosions with bigger AoE. Still spawns on you. It's not bad, but it's not that great. Now for the second best that is a good pairing with Vaporize is Flame Wind. So Flame Wind is Pyro Swirl. Whenever you trigger Pyro Swirl, everyone gets 1 stack of Wind Blessing Pyro. Essentially, you get like more damage for the characters that trigger the swirl. I'm unsure if this can only apply to Anemo characters because you have to trigger the swirl, but the wording's a bit confusing, so we ignore that part. Now, level 2, we do have two different parts. One is basic Firestorm, and the one is basic Gale base. So basic Firestorm is, it's basically like a small AoE Firestorm. It doesn't really move, it does AoE damage, but it only triggers whenever any Pyro or Anemo parties take field, which means if you do run a team with Hydro, you have less chances of triggering this buff very often. That's why my recommendation is to run basic Gale base. So basic Gale base, whenever your active character does an attack to the enemy, you will lose HP, but it will unleash Gale base, which is an AoE explosion like really fast that does AoE pyro damage, and the damage is based on how many stacks you have of origin. So I recommend basic Gale base. Level 3 enhances the initial, it just helps you do more damage. Level 4 has quite a few paths. So we have Howling Wildfire. Howling Wildfire, whenever your firestorms hit from I think this one, it will decrease the opponent's pyro and Anemo rest. I guess it's pretty decent because you can get up to like 4 stacks or something, but it's not too necessary. You can grab it, it's not bad, but it's not like amazing either. Searing Jetstream increases the damage of your basic firestorm, which is based on how many pyro and Anemo characters you have in your team. 16% first, 64% max. It's nice if you want to do that route, but it's not bad, but it's not what I will recommend. What I will recommend, however, is Searing Whirlwind. This is the enhanced version of basic Gale base. So whenever you build up the stacks up to 4, and then it will reset the stacks, and then your Gale base will do more damage by like a whole lot. That's the point. So Howling Inferno, whenever you have the passive, the Pyro Swirl buff active, the active character deals 50% increased damage, and the second part, whenever your active character's HP reaches, I think, below 50% or below 30%, they will be healed by 50% of their HP every 6 seconds. Now, this is a very nice one if you want to focus on personal damage, but I highly recommend Searing Whirlwind followed by Gale base, because if you were to go back to Vaporize, you can actually pair this together with the Titanic Tide combo from this tree, which allows you to basically apply Hydro and Pyro and consistently trigger Vaporize to enable this. On top of that, if you run an Anemo character, you can basically just do a whole lot of damage without having your characters with properly built DPS, which is absolutely amazing. So I do highly recommend this if you want to run with characters that are not very well built. Now for the last one, we do have Aqua Beast, which is Hydro Swirl. I don't recommend it too much because we don't have that many Hydro characters, which you can kind of do it, but the buffs are not really like crazy. So same idea as Origin from Flamewind, I'm not going to explain too much about that. So basic Waterfall and basic Kin are the two options for level 2. Basic Kin, to put into simpler terms, is that whenever a party member performs healing, you basically get like a Hydro Ball which records healing like Ocean Hill Climb and explodes once the duration ends. In simpler words, it's just a Hydro version of Ocean Hill Climb if you know that artifact. And then we do have basic Waterfall, which I prefer to choose. So whenever you get the Wind Blessing Hydro stack, you get 1 Hydro Core. When you get 3 stacks, it creates a Maelstrom, which in simple words is a Hydro version of a freaking vortex at the center of where you are, and it pulls enemy towards the center, acting as a very nice way to get a little bit of crowd control without relying on Anemo crowd control units. It's pretty nice, I prefer this one over the other one, so yeah. Then level 3 enhances the level 1 blessing. Level 4, we have Extreme Vortex and Extreme Cores. Extreme Vortex will count how many stacks you have from the initial blessing and then just give all members a Nemo damage bonus. If you do want to run Hyper Carry, Xiao, or Wanderer, this would be quite helpful, but honestly, you're better off using Faruzan. So it is nice to have, but there's not really that much, unless you're like an Anemo main that has like every Anemo DPS built as Anemo. Extreme Cores is the better version. So whenever you enter your combat, you gain maximum 3 Hydro Cores, which instantly will create a Waterfall Maelstrom. So you just have to just start and enter the combat. And then your Maelstroms will do additional damage and have bigger AoE, which means greater crowd control. So yeah, I think among the two, I think just do Flamewind and Vaporize. Just choose Titanic Tide any time of the day or the Hydro path. And then Flamewind, just go for basic Gale base. You'll be having a very, very easy time. It's so good. Sometimes I would be using some of my best characters and I literally just use all my bursts to set up my rotation. The next thing I know, the boss is already dead. Now for the next section. Now for the mystery cache, I basically took a look at every single card that you can select and categorized them to all the different categories that you can use to see how good they are. Now there are 2 categories, which is companion related cards and of course surprise cards and some miscellaneous one right here. So I'm going to go over all of them one by one very quickly. So now let me zoom in real quick. So the best one are the ones highlighted by the cyan color. Spontaneous Encore basically restores vigor to 1 or 2 of your characters, which is useful if your Nouvellette or any of your good characters are down to 1 vigor, so it's nice for you to get another chance at playing them to the next combat act. Impromptu Encore basically makes it so that you get a random character with 0 vigor to join the alternate cast, but all characters in your next run will start with 50% HP. It's a little bit situational, but honestly, like having more characters without paying a cost is pretty good. Congenial Comeback restores 1 vigor to a random character. However, in the next act combat event, your active character will lose 5% of their HP whenever they deal critical hit, which is actually kind of okay if you do have a healer, but if you don't, very likely you're not gonna die, and even if you die, your team should be well built enough with all the blessings to be able to kill it without worrying about dying. And probably the best one is Raring to Go, where 2 random characters with 0 vigor will rejoin their alternate cast, which basically allows you to select them again from the companion invite option. Now the wording here is a bit confusing with alternate cast, but in fancier words, basically they put it back to the lineup, which you can grab from the companion invite or companion random event. Now for the good ones, we do have quite a few. Rotating cast allows you to basically reset for one time whenever you try to invite a companion to your team. So if you don't like what you see, you can press the reset button and then you might get a character that you will want instead. Role Reprisal will basically make it so that a random character with 0 vigor return to your alternate cast, but you gain less flower. It's basically kind of like the slightly more costly version of Impromptu Encore, but it's better than nothing if you do want a character that you used before to come back again. 1000 Encounters is kind of useful if you have, let's say you've been getting all the buff cards and you don't have any more resets. Let's say you select the mystery cache and you get this card. This will allow your next event to be guaranteed to be companion random, which basically allows you to spend your flowers and guarantee yourself one companion, granted that you can actually pay the cost. Multiple entry is also one of the better ones, where whenever you select a companion event, they'll add 1 more character to your lineup, so instead of having 2 to choose from, you'll get 3 to choose from, which allows you to, have more options to maybe get the character you want. Now for the situational ones highlighted by orange right here, we have Companion, Overtime Performance, and Star-Studded Class. Now, Overtime Performance restores 1 vigor to a random principal cast member, which is basically the starting 6, but you gain 30 less flowers in the next combat act. This could be good if, let's say, you want to get Hu Tao back again, or a Xing Chu, or whichever of one of your stronger units, but not every unit is necessarily useful for you, and it's completely random, so it's very half-half. If you get the right characters, it's good, but most of the time it's not going to be too useful because you'd much rather have this buff on the other alternate cast. Star-Studded Cast is also situational in the sense that it consumes all your flowers and gives you a random alternate cast to join you. However, this is only good if you don't have any Fantasia flowers, or you barely have any, like let's say you only have like 20 or 30 or 40 like that, preferably a very low amount. So that way you technically gain a free character at a very discounted cost. However, if you do have like a lot of flowers that you want to spend, this is not that great, so try not to pick that. Then the last 2 companions are pretty bad, although I would say Impromptu is a bit situational. Impromptu Invitation is situationally okay or good, but most of the time it's not really needed. It basically makes the special guest stars, aka either Cloran, a choice of Cloran, Ororon, Sitlali, and Yunjin, to chance your principal cast. However, after completing the combat act, you can no longer select any sort of characters to join after you complete the fight. Now, this could be good, but honestly, you're better off not selecting this, finishing the combat act, and having a choice of 2 characters you can choose after finishing it. And plus, special guest stars is dependent on whether you have it in your account, whether you have those characters built and added into your list, but otherwise it's basically useless. Variable cast, you basically get another character in your main team, but you can't select after the combat is completed, which also makes it not that great. Now for the second selection, we do have Surprise, which have some pretty good buffs right here, I can tell you that right now. Now for all the ones at the top, all of these are absolutely amazing. Budget Banquet and High Efficiency Blessings basically makes it so that your companion events basically cost 10 less flowers. High Efficiency Blessing costs 10 less flowers for your buffs. Now, all of these buffs you can't really get unless you open up the rare mystery cache, which can either cost 15 or 40. But if you do get any of these early on, you would be basically balling. You would have more flowers, you have to spend less flowers, which allows you to pick more characters and buy more buffs. Now, 1000 benefits makes it so that every combat event you finish, you get 15 more flowers. So you would go from like 60 to 75, 90 to 105. The Elite Assault will go from 110 to 125, and bosses I think is like 110 to 135 or 125 or something like that. So it's pretty good. Free flowers, doesn't hurt. Explosive Excitement is also pretty nice. A random character where the vigor is not full will have their vigor fully restored. I don't know if this counts for characters that has 0 vigor, but I believe it actually does. And it doesn't bring the character to the option where you have to invite them again. It actually just takes whatever character you've already used previously. Now for the good ones, reroll basically gives you 2 more chances of rerolling your selectable events, which usually start at 3 at Visionary mode, so that's pretty good. Intermission reward is a guaranteed of getting a minimum of 20 flowers, but if you're lucky you can get 60 or 90 flowers, which allows you to buy more stuff. Prearrange program basically makes it so that you have 1 permanent additional selectable event, so instead of having 5 event options to select from, you now have 6. Now for the okay ones, we do have near equivalent exchange and I think close substitute that you see right here. Basically these are like some sort of equivalent exchange thing. Near equivalent exchange makes companions cost 10 cheaper, but blessings are 10 more expensive. Close substitute is the opposite, where blessings are 10 cheaper, but companion events are 10 more. These two are rather situationals. I think early on maybe you could use them for some form of strategy, but that's assuming that you would rather get more characters than buffs. Personally, I don't recommend picking up any of these because the total cost of buying a companion and 1 blessing is total at 140, so these things are not really going to change anything, but it depends on what strategy you want to take approaching a run. Now, Rich Reward is a way for you to access the buffs at the top. Basically, you get one of the events replaced with a Mystery Cache rare, which actually costs 15 Fantasia flowers. Now, keep in mind that a regular Mystery Cache usually costs 40, so getting this card essentially gives you a 25 flower discount and a guarantee to have a chance at getting any of these amazing cards. 1000 mysteries makes it so that you can get 1 extra effect whenever choosing a Mystery Cache event, so you would go from 2 to 3. Now for the last ones, which I would consider to be rather situational, are these 3 cards. Now Keen Choice makes it so that you gain an option to reset whenever you choose a Mystery Cache event for 1 time if you don't like what you see. However, the problem is that you also need to deal with the RNG of actually getting a Mystery Cache event, so there is a possibility you're not going to be using this card until maybe later towards the act. Try Your Luck is not guaranteed, but it's a gacha or random chance of getting Fantasia flowers. It is a 2 out of 3 chance, so you could try your luck, but otherwise you would probably be wasting your time. And yeah, I mean, if it's nice if you win, but if you lose, then it is what it is. Floral Reserve is very interesting. So when you have 0 flowers, you will gain 80 Fantasia flowers for once, but getting exactly 0 is quite difficult. However, you can pair this up together with, I believe it was Star-Studded Cast under Companion. If you only have like, let's say 20 Fantasia flowers, you consume all your flowers to get 1 random alternate cast, and then let's say you already have Give Floral Reserve from a previous event, then you can basically get 80 back, which basically puts you on a net positive. Anyways, this is probably the most effort I have placed for the past 2 days to make a full-blown theatre guide, so I hope you guys find every single information useful. As usual, you don't really have to watch the entire thing, and if you watch the entire thing, thank you for watching the entire thing because it's a lot of effort. A lot of effort really goes into making this video done, and I hope you all learned something new today and potentially help you get, well, I was gonna say 36 stars, but I meant 10 stars for your theatre so you can flex with all your fellow friends and at the very least get your 800 Primo Gem rewards. Otherwise, I think that's it for the video. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys next time. This is Ethereal, signing off. Peace out.